Hello and welcome everybody. Since Bandai loves to fuck up their spoiler season by not giving us new cards but new shiny energy markers instead, I decided to do a totally different video talking about floodgates. So I feel like this topic is a thing everybody talks about, but nobody really ever did maybe a kind of distinctions or categorization on what floodgates in Masters even are and how they are different from each other. And I want to talk today about this topic. So first off, what is even a floodgate, right? So if we look based on the definition, we see something like floodgates are continuous cards or effects that restrict players from performing specific game actions. And then for Masters, we are often referring to cards restricting swings or attacks with cards. So I want to be very specific about this. I know that there are cards that are also punishing other actions, but today I just want to talk about floodgates that are punishing or restricting attacks. So swings, where oftentimes the goal is to get rid of another card, get rid of a unison, or get rid of certain lives your opponent have right now. And when I sat down and tried to think about like what kind of floodgates are there even, I thought about many different cards, like many different cards, and I put them in a total of 5 categories. Right off the bat, those categories won't be perfect, right? Some other person might distribute them differently, might come up with a 6th or 7th category I haven't even thought about. I still think this is a nice get-go to maybe start a conversation about floodgates and how we should handle floodgates, right? And how we should think about floodgate. So first off, we have buff gates. I call them at least buff gates, and I gave them the definition of a buff gate is a type of floodgate that either boosts the defending leader or minuses the attacking card. When we talk about value, this is always something we should think about. I kind of feel like the value of those floodgates is meh. It kind of depends on the meta, it kind of depends on the push or the minus you give the attacking or defending card. And it also depends on your own deck, right? If your deck is able to do multiple buff gates a turn, for example, then a single buff might be way better than in another deck where you don't have multiple buffs in a turn. What might be examples of those cards? Well, the first example maybe everybody thinks of is Sensubin, a card that buffs a card by 5k for the turn and then also untaps 2 energy. This was like a very good card back then because every card swinging at you was 15k. Nowadays, every card that is played is something like 20 to 25k. So suddenly, just a 5k push is not really punishing your opponent since he can still swing with all of his cards without the need to combo something, right? However, if you have a Z leader, for example, like the Gogeta Aegis deck, and you then do a Sensubin, you suddenly have a 25k base leader. And then all those 20k cards need suddenly to combo a card. So you're punishing your opponent indirectly by giving him the feeling to combo more from his hand, and therefore he's losing value. Then we have something like Protector of the People. Basically similar, every time your opponent swings at you with a battle card, your leader gets a 5k push. So the leader gets higher and higher and higher. Then we have something like the Versus Negates or other battle cards that have a counter-attack effect and buff your leader or just buff your leader or something similar. We have something like Bio Broly, a fairly new Z battle card that buffs your leader and this card every time your opponent attacks or swings with a battle card. We sometimes even have leaders. This is like a new leader coming out, having the ability to buff himself for 5k for the turn. Or something like that minuses attacking cards to also refer on the definition back. So imposing presence. Whenever your opponent wants to swing into you, they have to give the attacking card -5 for the turn. This card is oftentimes very good if you're playing against decks that have access to multiple dual attackers, for example, being 20 to 25k. Next up, we have lock gates. I called them lock gates, and this was the last category I made of cards. The definition is a lock gate is a type of floodgate that restricts swinging with a specific card, sometimes into a specific target. For me, the value is good for targets that have value on swing effects, right? So for example, you're locking down a card from your opponent, you're restricting swinging with it, and you're restricting something like the Gomazi battle card from Arinsu. It has the effect every time they swing, you -1 in hand basically. And to restrict that kind of swing, to not let it swing in general, is like really healthy for your hand size and restricts your opponent from gaining value or from decrementing your value, right? Examples for that is, for example, the Stände. I feel like this card is heavily overlooked, especially since it's like generic, and for 2 energy total, you draw 1 card and you put this card under a card from your opponent, and then your opponent can't swing with this card if Stände is under it. So basically, it restricts the battle cards in a very good way without the need to remove them. Then you have something like Scouter Destroyed, and this is mainly the reason why I also put in my definition sometimes into specific target, because it does not allow 2 cards to swing into your leader. Then we have something like Son Gohan Key Training that just says, okay, this card stays in rest mode now and you can't switch it to active mode, therefore you can't really attack with it, right? Then we have something like Dabrura, which basically says -1, choose 1 card, it can't attack. Fair. Or even something like Petrification. This one is a little bit more special because it can also like negate on-swing effects for the attacking card. However, it can also just lock down another card, right? Or if you have a triple attacker, it locks down all future swings as well. Then we have the no unless floodgates. So now we're going into a territory where we kinda try to put a condition on our opponent that needs to be fulfilled. So a no unless floodgate gives the attacking player a condition he needs to fulfill to be able to attack. Usually those kind of floodgates are really strong because, especially in the early game, because we lose a lot of value, a lot of cards from hand, a lot of cards from board, we don't even have at that point in time. However, this value, the value of those cards diminishes the longer the game goes. So for example, if I have in the end 12 cards in hand, and then my opponent is using a floodgate that basically says whenever you want to swing, please put 1 card anywhere, I can still swing 11 more times, right? So it's not that punishing at the end game. Examples for that are Explosive Dance. Every time you want to swing with something but your leader, you have to put a Z card out of your Z energy. So early on you might not have much Z energy, but if you're playing against red, you will charge Z energy every now and then. And then if you're going for the finishing turn with 45 Z energy or very high power in your Z energy, this floodgate doesn't really do anything anymore. We have Heroic Prospect, also a good card for punishing early on, because every time your opponents want to swing with something higher, they have to bottom deck too. Then we have Cooler, for example. For every swing, but leader swing, please warp 1 card from hand. We have Mecha Freezer, we have Uneasing, and we have something like Bardock. And there are many more, right? I could also put Defending Friends on here. So this is like, I feel like the most common floodgate we experience. And early on, these are like, for every aggro player, we hate those cards because we can't really do anything about them, right? If played correctly and if played early on. Then we have the no-but floodgates. What do I mean with no-but floodgates? A no-but floodgate does only allow, sorry for the grammar mistakes. A no-but floodgate does only allow a specific amount of swings for a specific type of cards. Other cards are able, or other card types are able to attack as usual. The value is very strong in every phase of the game, depending if your opponent plays mainly on this specific card type. And I think to fully understand this, I need to give you examples. Bardock the Tenacious is like the most easy example you can think on. When you play Bardock Tenacious, you basically say, in your next turn, you can only attack once with battle cards. So you're saying basically no to battle card swings, but you can swing with Unisons and leader cards as many times as you want. Another thing is something like Light Bullet, Forbidden Power, or Flying Nimbus. All cards inherently special for yellow, and yellow is a very good color in those kind of floodgates. All saying kind of like, okay, you can only attack X more times with battle cards, but not restricting Unison swings and leader swings as well. And then we have also a generic example for every color but white and black, I think, that basically says if you negate a leader swing with that swing, this leader isn't allowed to swing anymore. So it restricts leader swings under a specific condition. I don't know if there's anything restricting Unison swings, just Unison swings. I know there is a card punishing Unison plays and restricting your opponent, but this floodgate belongs for me in another category. Those floodgates are really, really good. However, if you're playing Flying Nimbus against something like the new Goku Black deck, this floodgate is kind of useless, because your opponent will maybe just play 1 battle card and then swing with 1000 Unisons or something. so it does not really make sense to play the Floodgates in that specific matchup. Also, if your leader has a dual attack leader or restand leader, those Floodgates are also getting worse and worse because your opponent still is able to swing through. However, they still have kind of value. And then we have the last category of Floodgates. I call them the no Floodgates. Just no. Definition: a no Floodgate does only allow a specific amount of swings for the turn, if any. Value: by far the fucking strongest kind of Floodgate. And examples that directly come into mind are Baby Hutch. Basically you say counter attack, you can't swing anymore. Or something like Dormant that says you have this swing and the next swing. Then it's over. Doesn't matter type of card, it's just over. Then we have Absorption of Doom. Basically it's pretty similar to Dormant, but leader locked to the Black Fin leader. Or we have Whi's Capriciousness, also very similar to Dormant, but solely relying on a green Veku or Gogeta BR leader. Or something like Energy Field, this is restricted to the yellow Garlic Jr. Leader, also doing a very similar thing to Dormant, Absorption of Doom, or Whi's Capriciousness. So I feel like these kinds of Floodgates are by far the strongest in the game, because even if your opponent sees them coming, there is not really much they can do, right? So for example, if we look at Dormant, you have 2 swings in total. So you need to make every swing count, especially the first one where you can be pretty sure that there won't be any other counterattack going on, right? So you need to make that a double strike, a triple strike, to their face, whatever, if you want to push for damage. Or you try to outvalue them. You try to wait until your opponent has used all their dormants in hope that your value goes up while their value goes down over time, if this is the goal of your deck as well, right? So now that we have like all kinds of Floodgates, how do we balance them to make them good, and how do we know when we have a bad Floodgate? So first off, we introduce conditions. This is something Bandai has done over the past years. So there's always a condition when you want to play a Floodgate. Those conditions can be no condition at all, just like pay 1 energy, let's fucking go. This is pretty rare. It can be something like specific type of card on the field needed, like Heroic Prospect, he says you need a Unison in play, or Defending Friends, who says you need a Z Battle card in play, or Z Leader, or Explosive Dance, who says like you need a Z Extra in play, right? Like there needs to be another card on the field. They can be leader locked, like the no Floodgates, the 3 I showed you before, to Black Fin, Green Gogeta, or Yellow Garlic Jr. There might be an additional cost, for example Flying Nimbus or Dormant says discard 1 card from your hand and then the Floodgates goes live. Same for something like Uneasing Awakened Rage. Your own life needs to be X or less. Also Explosive Dance or Uneasing Awakened Rage do that in addition to the other costs they already have. They say like if your life is 4 or less and the other condition is also met. Or it cannot be activated next turn again. This is something Tenacious does. So basically Tenacious says, okay, if you play me, you can't play me the next turn. Therefore you can't activate this Floodgate effect as well. Or it is an SCR or limited to 1. This is the case for Hutch. And maybe it also costs a lot to activate. For Bio Broly, paying 3 and 3 for most red decks, if we exclude the red Broly deck where it belongs to. And I guess there are many more I'm not even thinking about. Like, for example, the combinations I just mentioned, like having X amount of life and a specific card in play. So now we know what kind of Floodgates they are, how strong they are and when they are strong, and we know that they are coming with conditions. So how can we identify a really good Floodgate? And the formula for that is pretty simple. We aim for high value, like a no or no but Floodgate, or sometimes even a no unless Floodgate, that comes with a low cost condition, right? Something like just no condition, or just discard 1, or low on energy, or whatever, right? So when we think about those 2 cards in comparison, we can just quickly evaluate them. So Senzu Bean, you play 1 energy at every point in time and you get a 5k push. So it's a buff gate. Buff gates are not that strong, however the condition is you can play it in your opponent's turn whenever you like. Like I said, if you compare that with other buff gate cards for the same deck or 20k base leader, this can be a very good card, especially if you can make use of that energy that comes also with it. For Flying Nimbus, this is a no-but floodgate. So basically, if you're playing against an opponent who plays a lot of battle cards, this floodgate's value is so fucking high. However, you also discard one, right? Good side is it's not locked to any life, so you can play it early on. You just need one yellow energy open. So this floodgate, I think it's out since BT3 or BT1. I think BT3. It's still played because the conditions are so good and the value you get for it is also fucking insane. Then there is one last thing I want to talk about, right? We now have 5 categories of floodgates. We know that there are specific conditions to activate them and that we should look for floodgates which have a high value, also in combination with other cards we're playing, but have low conditions in terms of activation, cards needed on the board, etc, etc. So sometimes when we play against other decks, we have the feeling that some floodgates are just unfair. And suddenly the question arises, what is a fair and what is an unfair floodgate? What is good and what is a bad floodgate as well, right? These are like 2 dimensions, sometimes maybe even the same dimension. And to talk about this topic is always a little bit emotional because obviously if you play a certain color, you might feel different about a floodgate than if you don't play a certain color. Or if you are a hyper-aggressive player, you might have a different opinion on certain floodgates than non-hyper-aggressive players, right? So I try to make this conversation on the lowest and most objective level I can get on. So first off, some floodgates are horribly designed. I'm talking about floodgates that are not good in the category they are and have too high condition. So basically, sometimes they are too difficult to set up and their effect is too small in return. And then we also have we have the second category of floodgate, which is basically they are getting stronger and stronger and stronger over time and limit design space, and their condition that once was like a high condition to fulfill gets progressively weaker the longer the whole game progresses. My cat doesn't want me to record right now. I'll give you 2 examples for that. One example for a shitty floodgate is Light Bullet. Light Bullet is a generic yellow card that says negate the attack, then switch 2 of your battle cards to rest mode, and then your opponent can only attack 1 more time with battle cards for the turn. So, just thinking about the category, this is a no-but floodgate, right? Your opponent can only attack 1 more times with battle cards, but he can attack with unisons and leaders as many times as he wants. However, if we think about the condition nowadays, having 2 cards on the board before your opponent opens with their first swing is not something easy to fulfill. Maybe when this card came out, you had certain decks flooding the zone and then it was more like, how can I defend myself instead of removing cards? But nowadays, like half of the cards printed and most of the archetypes in the meta right now have very good removal. I think like Arinsu is the only exception if we think about Wabjita, Pan, or even Krillin like emerging now in the meta. All of those decks remove your board easily, like on a side note, right? So setting up this floodgate is just horrible, even though it is in the no-but category, right? So this is like a bad floodgate because the effect is too small in return and it's just too difficult to set up. And then we have my favorite example for a floodgate that gets stronger and stronger and stronger as time progresses, which is Dormant. Basically, it's a no floodgate, which is totally generic, not locked to any condition, but an additional cost to just discard 1. Additionally, it has the effect to kill any tokens on the board and battle cards up to an energy cost of 2, and you can even activate it for free with a unison. This card in the past was never a problem, because in green decks you had like 8 cards in hand and then like paying 1 or even paying 0 and then discarding 1 discard and another green card was a high cost, right? But nowadays, when we see decks like Zamasu Mill having 13 to 14 cards in hand, or Nameku having 13 to 14 cards in hand, or green getting more and more barrier blocker, which you can combine with this, suddenly you have a weird power scaling and the floodgate gets stronger and stronger and stronger over time, maybe even so strong that Bandai at some point needs to ban that card to open up the design space again, right? Because the problem with those cards, not this card, but those cards, is that Bandai needs to be really careful designing new cards so you don't create a loop of you can't even hit me once, right? There is no way you can touch me for 4 turns or something. This was my video over Floodgates. What do you think about Floodgates? Do you think there are certain Floodgates that are really unfair or really well balanced? And how do you feel about old Floodgates in terms of their development? Are they getting stronger? Are they getting weaker? And do you think Floodgate should be leader locked? Because I have the feeling that would solve a lot of problems for future designs and would make the game even more interesting. This was the video. I hope Bandai designs, or not designs, reveals something interesting today. And with that, see ya.